Welcome to Talk Tantra to Me. It is such an honor to be holding space for this incredible knowledge to make its way into your ears and lifestyle. Today, I talk Tantra with Dr. Laurie Mintz. She is a licensed psychologist, certified sex therapist, professor, and author of Becoming Clitoris. Thank you so much, Laurie, for being here. I am so excited to have you, and I've been appreciating your content so much in this journey. I would love to start by just kind of getting a sense of what was your path in becoming a psychologist that specializes in sexuality. How did you discover this passion and purpose?
Okay, well, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. And that is a great question. I was one of those kind of weird kids, I think, that always knew I wanted to be a psychologist. We could unpack that in terms of like many psychologists. I think there were some underlying family issues that I was subconsciously, wanting to solve. But I was also always just really interested in people and how they tick. So I always knew I wanted to be a psychologist, and sex was not even on my radar. So I went to grad school, I became a psychologist, opened a private practice, also teaching at the university. And for many, many years, I specialized not in sexuality, but in the treatment of eating disorders. And long story short, I mean, for anyone who has struggled, I'm sorry for your struggle with that, and know that you can recover. And obviously, body image is a huge piece of dealing with an eating disorder. So I certainly talk to a lot of clients about how their, pain around their bodies affected them sexually. And then, if to be really transparent, I got to a place in my career where I was pretty burned out on what I was doing.
Mhm.
And I had kind of an existential crisis of sorts of, what do I want to do with my life? And because I was a professor, I was needing to do a lot of writing for like journals, scientific studies. And in this existential crisis, I realized I don't really like writing research. I want to translate the psychological literature for the public. And then I was like, well, what do I want to write about? And all of a sudden it dawned on me that I was raised in an unusually sex positive household. And I was always asking my clients about sex, and my friends, and everybody I asked had an issue. And so I thought, I want to write about sex. And honestly, that was the beginning of the journey. And I kind of did some deep dives into what was missing in the literature. And I wrote my first book, which was called A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex, which was a self-help book for women struggling with diminished desire. And then things just sort of rolled from there. I started teaching human sexuality to grad students, sex therapy. I got a job at the University of Florida where I started teaching undergrads, and that's where the whole idea of the orgasm gap, which is the topic of my next book, Becoming Clitoris, which you mentioned, and it really whoa, it spoke to me. And I started hearing my students' stories, their pain around this. I started teaching to women's pleasure, closing the gap, and I would get notes from my students. Thanks to your class, I'm orgasmic. Thanks to your class, my girlfriend's orgasmic. And I thought, I can't keep this in my classroom at the University of Florida. And that's when I wrote Becoming Clitoris, and things have just continued from there. And the more I work in the field, the more I write in the field, the more I, talk, the more passionate I become, and the more I uncover just the depth of the sexual problems in our culture that need to be fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can feel that we're all so grateful that you've done this work, because I know so many of us, myself included, didn't really have that really empowering sex education, whether it was in the home or at school or at university. And now we're out looking for answers. So thank you for putting that information out there and doing the work so that it's accessible. And I'd love to jump a little bit deeper into chatting about the orgasm gap. What is that really?
So the orgasm gap is the opposite of orgasm equality, right? And the orgasm gap is the consistent finding, and it's a very, very robust finding in the research literature, that
Mm,
when cisgender men, so people born with penises who identify as men, get it on with cisgender women, people with vaginas who identify as women. And I say that because there's not research on non-gender conforming or trans individuals. So this research is with cis individuals. So and I'm going to use the word women and men in the rest just for ease, but that's what I mean. When women and men get it on, the women are having substantially fewer orgasms than the men. Let me illustrate this with some striking statistics. In one of the first studies to examine the orgasm gap with about 800 college students, 39% of the women versus 91% of the men said they always or usually are or always orgasm during a sexual encounter. Like, whoa, that's quite a gap. Now, that study didn't ask the context of the sex. Was it friends with benefits? Was it hookup? Was it relationship? Subsequent research has confirmed that the orgasm gap is the biggest in casual sex. It gets smaller in friends with benefits. It gets smaller in relationship sex, but it never closes altogether. Even in relationship sex, women are having about 1 orgasm to every 3 male orgasms. So it's this hit to me, the orgasm gap, that was more than just a statistic. It is like a hidden sexism that is in our culture that we don't acknowledge, we don't talk about. We assume it's normal, and
mm.
it's not. It's not. It's a reflection of societal problems and sexism. I'm not blaming men, I'm not blaming women, I'm blaming culture.
Interesting. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing those statistics. When was this, when did people start researching it? Is it like, what is the data like in terms of when people started talking about this? And like, are these studies super recent or?
The first study was in 2005, so that's not too recent. But the studies continue. I've conducted them myself. And I actually just published a review paper of all of the studies that have examined this. And they span from 2005 to 2021. I mean, in the data, it's getting a little better maybe, but not much. There is still a massive orgasm gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think causes this? I know that you feel that it's this cultural sort of manifestation. What does that look like? How does that happen?
Okay, so before I answer that, would it be okay with you if I tell you some, like, because some people say, no, 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 it's not cultural. Women's bodies are difficult or elusive. So if you would allow me to share some stats with you that illustrate that's not true, and then I'll tell you what I think the problem is. So people say, oh yeah, well, women's bodies are difficult, they're elusive, hard to make us orgasm, all that. But other data tells us that's not true. For example, when women pleasure themselves, 95% reach orgasm easily and within minutes. Our
Mhm.
bodies know what to do. Okay. Now people say, well, it's easier when you're alone, of course. But then there's data that looks at when women have sex with other women versus with men. And when they have sex with other women, they have way more orgasms than when they have sex with men. I think the most fascinating study, now I must admit it was a subset of another study. So there were only like 14 women in it, but I would bet my bottom dollar we could replicate it on a larger scale. These 14 women identified as bisexual, and they hooked up with both women and men. So this is the same woman, right? Her body is the same. And when she has first time hookup sex with a woman, she orgasms 85% of the time. First time hookup sex with a man, 7% of the time.
That's
What?
crazy.
Right, right. So what
Wow.
does it tell us? It's not our bodies. It is something about the way we do heterosexual sex.
Mm.
That's the problem. I mean, there's other problems, but my opinion is that heterosexual sex revolves around the penis. It revolves around intercourse. We even use the word sex and intercourse as if they're one and the same. We use the word foreplay as just a lead up to the main event. It's like we revolve, and only 4 to 18% of women orgasm from just penetration alone. Yet look at any movie, mainstream movies, porn. They show women having fast and fabulous orgasms from just penetration without clitoral stimulation. So what causes the orgasm gap? It is our cultural ignoring and ignorance around women's most reliable route to orgasm, which is clitoral stimulation alone or coupled with penetration.
And how do you perceive that we got here at this point? Do you think that this is a recent development? Do you think that this is something that our society has been building over time? I'm curious if you have any insight on that.
Yeah, this is going on, unfortunately, for centuries and centuries and centuries, except for a very, very, very brief period in the 60s. And in fact, there's some beautiful writings by other folks. Rebecca Chalker is one of them. She wrote the book, The Clitoral Truth, and she documents that the clitoris has been lost and found in history over and over again, omitted from medical textbooks even. So I think the time is now to fix this problem, but this is not a new problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you perceive is the shift? Like, how do we close this gap, both culturally and also, as individuals and partnership, taking responsibility as, females, women, people with, vulvas, closing it on that space, but also, in the collective as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Becoming Clitorate is about. It's a analysis of why we have it, and suggestions on how to close it culturally and in individual bedrooms. Culturally, conversations like this, using the word, I mean, you wouldn't believe how many people won't even say the word clitoris, like, even though penis is so common, it's calling out false images in the media. And there's some great actresses working on that. It's, really advocating for that cultural shift. And in individual bedrooms, it is knowing that you are completely fine the way you are. Your body is fine the way it is. Most of us need clitoral stimulation, and, masturbate, find out what you like. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than I'm making it sound because of the culture, but buy a vibrator, get some lube, pleasure yourself, find what you like. And the most underutilized but essential advice is get the same type of stimulation alone you get with a partner. So many of us, did you know, here's another stat. I'm like, I think these stats really say it all.
I love it. I love the stat.
When women pleasure themselves, less than 1% do so exclusively by putting something in their vagina.
Yeah, that's not surprising to me.
Yeah, of course. The rest of us do clitoral stimulation alone or coupled with penetration. Yet we get with men and we think, I don't need that. I'll just come. I mean, it's like there's like this disconnect. So I think that's the most, and changing the script, if you will. I know that sounds like, what's a script? What do you mean by that? Like, the cultural script for heterosexual sex goes foreplay just to get her ready for intercourse, intercourse, male orgasm and ejaculation, sex over, women faking often. Change the script, slow it down. Foreplay, I hate that word. So let's just talk about getting ready, spending time on clitoral stimulation. Take turns. She comes first, maybe with oral sex, for example. Then he comes second with intercourse, or enough fooling around that both people are aroused, intercourse. Then use a vibrator on her. Turn, or a very sound technique that sex therapists often recommend is during intercourse, take your own hand or a vibrator. Touch yourself. That is not less sex than not doing so. So we need to educate people, and we need to change the way we do heterosexual sex.
Yeah, I love all of this, and I really appreciate your uh emphasis on, like, self pleasure as well, and figuring out what you like. And I think that, speaking from personal experience, with myself and also the people that I've worked with, there's a lot of fear around, like, communicating as a woman to a man about what those desires are and how to get it, and how to not bruise the ego of the man who just desires this surrender in some way, shape, or form. And I'm curious what you think is maybe contributing to that epidemic in terms of maybe gender equality or otherwise.
In terms of like, in terms of, I think I
Like,
lost your question.
in
I'm sorry.
in terms of the gender inequality, and like how we're able to even like show up to communicate our desires and ask for what we want, I feel like there's a piece of gender inequality at play here and how we're relating, period.
Oh, of course. Like, first of all, most cis men don't have problems asking for what they want, and what they want is so clearly portrayed in the media, right?
Mm,
Blowjob, penis in the vagina. But what's not portrayed is our clitoral stimulation. And there's even research that shows that women think asking for that is pushy. And and there, that is gender inequality right there in the bedroom. Why is it pushy to say what you want when you're with someone? And I think it goes it goes to the depth of the problem of men's sexual pleasure being elevated as more important and women's being secondary.
yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also this aspect of men, or like, if there's someone that's giving an experience and someone that's receiving an experience, if the receiver is to ask for what they want, there's this automatic assumption as the giver that I'm doing something wrong, or I'm not good, right? Or I messed this up in some way, shape, or form. And I think that there's a lot of power in this ability to shift the narrative to say that, no, like, I'm sharing my desires with you because I want to receive them from you, which is such a gift. I want you to hold that container for me. And I see this so much in oral sex as well, and how we see oral sex again as foreplay instead of a main act. What is one way that we could flip that to look at that context a little bit differently, to offer a different experience for both men and women.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all part of the same problem. And the research shows that women are much less likely to receive oral sex and hookups than men.
Mm.
That the idea that, oh, that's just something for relationships, yet women are giving oral sex and hookups. And I think we need to shift the narrative in terms of equally valuing women's and men's most reliable route to pleasure and orgasm, rather than setting one as more central than the other. When he was speaking, Dr. Peter Slavin, speaking in terms of gender and racial inequity in the healthcare system, said there can't be quality without equality. He was talking about the medical system and
Mm.
our, but I think it can also be applied to sex, that without, until we get equality, we're not going to have quality sex. And that's what we need to work for.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely resonate with that. across the board. And you had mentioned a few like shows or actresses that are advocating for more pleasure centric in terms of the female experience. Do you have any like shares in that space, any movies or TVs that you could recommend that people might enjoy in that space?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's an Instagram handle if you're on Instagram, called the Clit Test. And they literally, that's what they do. They pick movies that either pass or fail the clit test. So go there for more. But the person that I really, and I had the honor of sharing a stage with her to talk about this, which was such an honor, is Rachel Bloom, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, the creator and co-creator and star of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. She actually used the word clitoris on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and you can hear her talk about it on her YouTube. She had to go through so many things just to be able to say the word on the show. And there was she did a song on that same episode called The Buzzing in the Bathroom about the vibrator. I mean, she really did a great job on that episode. And she's been very vocal about the need to show women's pleasure on mainstream TV.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I will have to check out this clit test, see what I should be watching to create that equality. Playing off of this more playful space, what is your favorite nickname for the clitoris? I hear that you have an interesting answer for this.
I do have an interesting answer. So let me take a dive back if I can. So when I first started playing in my mind with the idea of becoming clitorate, like the whole idea started with when I realized that we have more nicknames for the penis than any other word in the English language, yet we don't even say the word clitoris. And I was sitting having coffee with a student, and she was like, it's crazy. There's got to be a better word. And I just, all of a sudden, I was like, oh, you know how we call the penis a dick? Mm-hmm. Well, dick is actually a name of a person. Half of us don't even know that anymore because it's become so synonymous with penis. Mm-hmm. But it's short for, it's short for Richard. I almost was like, what is it short for? Because no one even uses it anymore. Yeah. So all of a sudden I thought we need a female name for this. So I thought Tori, because Tori, if you look, CLITORIIS, clitoris. Tori is in the middle of clitoris. So I was like, I was actually going to name my book Tori, but editors were like, no one will know what you're talking about. So, but then that's a very popular name right now. And when I wrote a blog about it, people were like, no, please. Like, I could never, like, what about my friend Tori and this and that? So then I came up with a different name, which is Cleo. Oh. Cleo in Greek means the key, which, the clitoris is the key to women's pleasure. So I'm good with Tori. I'm good with Cleo. I'm good with just clit. I'm good with clitoris. I'm just like, let's just start saying the word. And there's even research that and this makes sense, that women who are more comfortable saying the word clitoris have more orgasms.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see that. And I love the idea of Cleo. To me, that's very goddess energy. And to come into that, like, I deserve this pleasure. I'm a goddess of pleasure, could be a really fun way to invoke that name into the space as well. That being said, yeah, thank you. I'd love like one or two things that, vulva owners or women can do as an individual to take home from this to close the pleasure gap, and maybe a couple of things that partners of vulva owners or men can do to close the pleasure gap.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your inclusive language, because this is really about all vulva owners. The research is on cis women, but I've worked with, a trans man who, learn to, he was calling it his little penis, but he learned to love his clitoris,
Mm.
his former clitoris. So, okay, so here's some take homes for people with vulvas. First of all, if you need clitoral stimulation, totally fine. Welcome to the rest of the 96% of us. There's nothing wrong with you. Stop saying you wish you didn't, or you're so unlucky, or those 4% are the lucky ones. Shift your attitude. This is how our bodies work. Embrace it, enjoy it. Use your mind, couple ways, like really talk to yourself that your pleasure is equally important. Also, another reason we didn't talk about why so few people with vulvas orgasm is a lot of us are up in our head. How do I look? How do I is he having fun? Is she having fun? Am I going to orgasm? Do I look good? Do I smell good? Well, that you can't have an orgasm doing all that stuff. So practice mindfulness in your daily life and then apply it to the bedroom. Masturbate, 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 find out what you like, and then communicate that with a partner and get the same type of stimulation alone. So those are the tips for vulva owners. For penis owners, let go of the idea that your penis is essential to her pleasure. And while that can be an initially bitter pill to swallow, frankly, it is to your benefit because you'll enjoy sex more. You won't have all that pressure to last long and thrust hard. Ask your partner. Every clitoris likes to be touched a little differently. Ask your partner, say, your pleasure is important to me. Will you tell me or show me how you like to be pleasured?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good take homes there. Especially, chatting about someone that's a partner of a vulva owner, creating the space for like comfortable conversation, asking things that are easy to answer, like yes or no questions. Does this, or how does this feel? Or does this feel okay? Like this is definitely something that sounds a little bit hard to swallow at first because there's so much pressure on the situation of sexual intimacy to be very spontaneous. But once you have the foundation laid, then you have so much more opportunity because you're unlocking a whole different door for both of you, which is super incredible and exciting. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I'd love to close out with just a couple more questions here. One of which is obviously your book is becoming clitorate, and the clitoris is so important for feminine pleasure. I'm curious how this overlaps with other types of, orgasmic potential, including things like, the G-spot or the urethral sponge or the cervix. Do those show into this work or the studies at all?
Okay, so those are big questions. It's a whole thing. Okay, so the G-spot is I'm glad you talked about the urethral sponge. The G-spot is not a spot in the vaginal wall. It's called the clitoral urethral vaginal complex, and it has parts of the vagina, parts of the clitoris, parts of the urethra. And we do know that some vulva owners find it and they love it. Some can't find it. Some find it and don't like it. So it's not this holy grail inside your vagina that everybody has to find. Number two, the cervix. There are very, very few rare women who like to be stimulated there. Most people with vulvas find that extremely painful, in fact, and the penis hitting the cervix is one of the biggest causes of painful sex, because when you're aroused, your cervix pulls up and out of the way. And if you have penetrative sex before that happens, the penis can hit the cervix. Also, some women like breast stimulation. Some women can think themselves to orgasm. So, but what has happened, in my opinion, is that we discover all these ways women can orgasm, and then the media sets it up like this is the best way. This is a good way. You should try this. Everybody should do this. And sure, have fun, experiment. But we don't, if for the vast majority of us, clitoral stimulation is involved, don't ignore that. And if it isn't, fine too. But what I want to point out is we don't do this with male orgasms. From a feminist cultural perspective, we don't have articles on the 20 ways men can orgasm. We don't even differentiate linguistically between like the way you're being stimulated. We don't have like prostate orgasms, blowjob orgasms, intercourse orgasms. We just say orgasm. It's only when it comes to women's orgasms do we label by the point of stimulation and then set up a hierarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such an important thing to touch on, especially going into spaces with Tantra that are also involving spirituality, and then saying that, different parts of our bodies have different archetypes, and it can all be very powerful, but there is no wrong or right way to be in pleasure. And what's almost the most fun part for me is to try it all and to incorporate different things. For me personally, I find that putting one or two or three things together into the pot of stimulation can be the most exciting. And so allowing yourself to be open to the different types of touch, but not to expect it to be something, because everyone's body is really different, and that's the beautiful thing.
Right. Experiment, open yourself up. But if you can't find your G spot, or you find it and you don't like it, don't diminish yourself. That's really my message.
Yeah,
There isn't the right way.
absolutely. Cool. And, kind of going to the other end of that, what would you recommend if you have any tips or advice for, vulva owners that feel like they really struggle to orgasm? Maybe they've never orgasmed.
Okay, tongue in cheek, read my book. I mean, honestly, that's what the whole book is about, how to orgasm. Or read Betty Dotson's book, Sex for One. Like, you will learn all the tips and the techniques. But the most essential thing is buy yourself some lubricant. Vulvas aren't meant to be touched dry. Spend some time with yourself, touch yourself, experiment, breathe, move.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, buy a vibrator. Eventually, you will orgasm.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And also coming back to that idea that you had mentioned a few questions ago about the mindfulness piece. To me, if you have a distracted mind, you're going to be having a distracted sexual experience, which means that you're not going to be fully present for that pleasure to come through, which is, such an integral piece as well.
Absolutely. Practice mindfulness in your daily life and then apply it to the bedroom. And I'm guessing you've spent lots of time on that topic here before, but the one thing I like to say about mindfulness is it's simply explained, it's putting your mind and body in the same space and time.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times our body is in one place and our mind is somewhere else. We could be receiving oral sex and thinking about that email we have to return, or do I smell okay? And mindfulness doesn't mean that you're always present. I mean, that none of us are. It's impossible. But because our minds just can go backwards and forward. But what mindfulness teaches you to do is notice quicker when it wanders and bring it back. And once you learn that in life, you can learn it in bed. And mindfulness is truly sex's best friend.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. We forget that our brains and our minds are wired to be thinking and to be constantly aware of our environment. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but you can shift the focus instead onto what's happening in my body instead of what's happening outside of me. I know for myself, I often used to struggle a lot with focusing on like, well, when is the orgasm going to happen, instead of just being in the pleasure that was happening in the moment that was likely going to naturally lead me there anyways.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and one little piece of research maybe to end with that I think is very compelling. The latest brain research shows that the state of mind that you're in, if they do MRIs of your brain, right before orgasm is the same state with deep mindfulness meditation. That you're part of your conscious, self-conscious, self-monitoring brain turns off. So being able to not monitor, to be in your body, to be mindful is the prerequisite for orgasm.
Yeah, that's incredible and so empowering. Thank you for sharing the science behind that. I feel like I knew that was true in my body and from my experience, but I love having people like you on the podcast to really bring the research into this space to create the evidence, which is so empowering. So thank you for that. Closing out with a couple questions. What awakens your eros? What turns you on? What makes you feel erotically alive?
We're talking like actual erotically alive.
I love to see where people go with this question. It's a bonus question. I ask everyone this question. So,
okay. So in my life, it's conversations like these, empowering people sexually. In the bedroom, it's some lube, my partner, and connection, and a little bit of vibration.
I love it. Beautiful, simple. And where can listeners find you or support you?
Please, you can go to my website, which is www.drlauriemintz.com, DRLAURIEMINTZ. And from there, you can find links to all of my social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, all with the same handle, Dr. Laurie Mintz. And my books are available wherever books are sold, indie bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc.
Amazing. Great. And I will definitely be linking all of those things in the show notes. So if people are wanting more, they will definitely be able to find you. And thank you again, Laurie, for joining me today. And I also want to express my gratitude to the listener. Thank you once more for opening yourself up to the idea of sacred sexuality. With so much gratitude and love, have a sexy and spiritual day. And I'll catch you next week on Talk Tantra to Me. Ta-ta.